Welcome everyone to our 2024 May edition of IBA Stage, in which we are excited to have with us the Yokohama Triennale with its 8th edition titled Wild Grass, Our Lives. I'm really happy to introduce you with Carol Yinghua Lu. Carol is an art historian and a curator based in Beijing, where she is director of the Inside Out Art Museum. She was artistic director and chief curator of OCAT in Shenzhen between 2012 and 2015, and co-artistic director of the Guangzhou Biennial in 2012. Also a long-time contributing editor at Frieze magazine and has been, among others, on the jury for the Venice Biennial in 2011. Also joining us today is Lu Xun. Lu Xun is an artist and a curator based in Beijing. His practice investigates the interplay between art, culture, and politics in modern and contemporary Chinese history. He has exhibited in multiple biennials. It would be way too long to list all of them, but just to give you a sense of his involvement and his knowledge of biennials, he exhibited in Busan, in Istanbul, at the Asia Pacific Triennial, in Prospect, among many others. The two of them are the current curators of the Yokohama Triennale, and we will hear from our next guests how special this is and how unusual this still is for large-scale events in Japan. Our third guest is Aki Hoashi, who is a long-term friend and essential part of the IBA board. But she's also the deputy executive director of the organizing committee for the Yokohama Triennale, which she has joined in 2010, when Yokohama Museum of Art became its main hosting institution. She has worked on the past 4 editions since then, and is currently running its 8th Yokohama Triennale, which is one of the first large-scale international exhibitions in Japan. And it was inaugurated in 2001. And I think with this short introduction, I would like to hand you over the word, Aki, to hear a little bit about how the Yokohama Triennale has evolved and what its role is. And then we can move on to the specific of the 8th edition with Carol and Lu Xun.
Thank you, Christian, for the introduction. Hello, my name is Aki Hoashi. For those who don't know me, I'm with the Yokohama Triennale, and as introduced, have been running for more than a decade of this triennial in Yokohama. And for this opportunity, since many of you may not know our triennials and biennials in Japan, I'm just going to give you a very brief and quick run through what we do and who we are and what kind of landscape we have for international exhibitions in Japan. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is a painting. You wonder why I'm starting with this painting for Yokohama, but this is a painting by Wilfred Heine, which was painted in 1855, and the title is Commodore Perry and his party landing at Yokohama to meet the shogun's commissioners. So this is just to touch on our history of Yokohama as a city. It used to be a very small village in the port area, and it was not until the 19th century, mid-19th century, that the Westerners approached our shores, especially this Commodore Perry, who's an American, and who knocked on our doors to open our doors to the West. We had been isolated and had closed our trade to the West for the last 200 years. So Yokohama was the beginning of what we call modernization in Japan, but this is also part of westernization in Japan. Interestingly, we don't call this colonization of Japan because we had had some grips on ruling the country. But we really kind of captured the moment and we engaged in westernizing ourselves. So this is the unique history of Yokohama as a city. Now, most of the cities like Kyoto and Tokyo are known for its historical very long history. Our history is comparatively very short compared to Kyoto or Tokyo, which has more years of being a capital of Japan. But we have been on kind of a sidekick to our history, but we have been center since the 19th century. So this is how the city looks today on the shores, the same kind of shore. And what started as 100 people's village is now is a city of 3.7 million, which is the second largest city in Japan. Now, I have my little timeline here of history of the Yokohama as a city, starting from 1854 and up to 1964. This is during the time after the Second World War, when Japan was totally devastated after the war. But starting in 19th century, the land was flattened for 2 times. Once in 1923, a great Kanto earthquake. So no buildings, all the buildings were flattened at that time. And after 1945, when the Allies bombed our whole city and most of the buildings were demolished. Therefore, we had been flattened for 2 times and have been rebuilding for the last century. Now, this is a port city, and there's this old quarter of the city, the original part of the village, and this is where we are, the new part, the new development, which is all reclaimed land, and that's where our museum is located. So the Yokohama Triennale is museum-based, but also expands into the city because we believe that museum is, of course, important, but Triennale is an opportunity to expand ourselves beyond the museum walls. And in Japan, in the 1970s and 90s, there was a growth in museums. But however, after the 2000s, there was a growth in art festivals. And so we were built in 1989, interestingly, when the museums were growing in numbers. And now we have engaged in the festivals, which is kind of the trend after the 2000s. So we have been very trendy in our approach in museum management, as you can see. And so we had started in 2001 and up to 2020, we had up to 2024. So we are running our 8th edition at the moment. It's every 3 years, so it takes a little bit more time to prepare ourselves. And when we started with really putting art in the public areas, using the port and using shopping malls even. And then we landed it to start using the museum in earnest. And the first one that we opened in 2011, this was right after the Great Eastern Japan earthquake and the nuclear power plant devastation. So it was a time when everybody did not feel so happy. And I think this summer when we brought this show, everybody was very happy to see our museum open, these Ugo Rondinone's sculpture in front of the museum, taking pictures. We could see that art was quite essential. And this is how we felt when we opened our show during COVID as well. We saw our audience really engage and embrace and appreciate art as part of their lives, something that is essential in times of turmoil and despair. And so 2014, this is when Morimura Yasumasa, an important artist, also curated and had a very unique view on Japanese art history as well as world art history. 2017, when Ai Weiwei had his work related to Syrian refugees right on our facade of the museum. And then 2020, when we had Rocks Media Collective, and they were talking about toxicity. This was before COVID had become a pandemic, but we happened to be talking about toxicity and boom, the COVID came. So this is their show. And this is the first time that in 2020 was the very first time that we engaged with international curators. Interestingly, up until then, we had curators to collaborate with us, but not to direct the whole show. So we had Rocks Media Collective, and then for the 8th edition, we have Lu Ding and Caroline Fallu. Interestingly, Rocks Media Collective's art direction had covered a lot of Global South. And our audience got to see many works from the Middle East and the Global South. And for the Japanese audience, this is very important to bring these art because it's not often that the Global South art is shown in this scale. Now, Lu Ding and Carol, who will talk to you directly later, has embraced what we call East Asia and starting from there to look at the world. So through these 2 editions, we have invited the international curators to give us a new view on how to see the world other than from Japan. And through their lens, we get to see the world and also see the details of the landscapes in different cultures and different histories. So it's been a great honor to have these international creators work with us. And so they have worked with us during. China was a bit late in opening their country after COVID. So actually, once we appointed them, it took some time before they could actually come to Japan or even go outside of China to do research. So even though Documenta had opened and everybody was in Europe, they could not travel at that time. So these time lags had affected us in the way of thinking. But I think Carol and Lu Xun has embraced this challenge very well, and we're very happy with the outcome. So that was a very brief running through what we do in Yokohama. But Carol, you can take the floor, and I'll give back the microphone to Christian first. Thank you.
Thank you, Aki, for the brief but very to the point presentation of where we are in terms of where the exhibition took place, both culturally and physically. And I now pass the floor to Carol to hear more about how this project unfolds, and we meet afterwards for the Q&A, which I'm really looking forward to.
Hello, thank you for having us today. We just returned from a short trip to Yokohama in early May to revisit the exhibition after its opening. So this is a really great opportunity for us to share some of our process and thoughts of working on the Triennale. I will first give an overview of the exhibition, and Lu Xun will answer questions with my help in translation. In this short presentation, we hope to first reflect on how we started and what were the social and artistic contexts back then. After that, we will talk about some of the issues we wish to address through this Triennale. We will then give an introduction of the theme and how it unfolds through the 7 chapters we have designed, and finally, some examples of the exhibition. On the left of this slide is a screenshot of a government announcement of daily COVID update of newly infected cases on December 15th, 2021. On this very same day, we received this email on the right from the organizing committee of Yokohama Triennale to submit an exhibition proposal for consideration. By that time, we had experienced 2 full years of COVID lockdown. While the rest of the world was slowly reopening itself, we saw no prospect of this happening inside China. Our daily life was mostly conditioned by heightened vigilance of COVID spread and fear of being stuck in lockdowns. It was full of anxiety. In the meantime, since the outbreak of COVID at the turn of 2019 and 20, we had experienced a great sense of isolation from the rest of the world in every sense, both physically and intellectually. You might still recall the very intense ideological conflicts that occurred with various ways of dealing with COVID in different social systems. As much as it was a medical crisis, it was also extremely politicized. Inside China, the discourse of de-internationalization and anti-globalization prevailed, full of complex sentiments. We were thus very surprised to receive this invitation. It was completely unexpected. We had not seen Yokohama Triennale before, so this has been a great learning experience. Yokohama is a Japanese city south of Tokyo, one of the first Japanese ports opened to foreign trade in 1859, as Aki was pointing out. It was the first stop where Chinese intellectuals and revolutionaries first landed in Japan in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Some of them would be bringing left-wing thoughts from Japan into China through translation, writing, and publishing. This Triennale has had an exceptional record of working with artists as its artistic directors. Besides the Rex Media, Japanese artist Morimura Yasumasa had directed the 2014 edition. In our case, Liu Ding is an artist as well, and we have worked together on many curatorial projects before. When we were announced as artistic directors in June, we were not able to go to Japan for the usual process of signing the agreements and having our official Triennale portrait taken. So we had to improvise at home and had our portrait taken in our home, which is this photo on the right. As we started working on the exhibition in the beginning of 2022, we found ourselves face a completely different set of conditions for working on an international art show. Part of the world's recovery at the turn of 2021 and 22 was the coming back of many biennales, as it is shown on this event calendar of 2022. In our observation, biennales have become increasingly institutionalized, subject to the logic of capital and something of a spectacle. Secondly, while they were engaged in many newsworthy discussions, their relevance to social realities has been significantly weakened. Thirdly, there is a lack of historical depth to biennales while they continuously try to embody a kind of universality, a side product of globalization. Since its vigorous development from the 90s, it has played an important role in the formation of global contemporary art, both as a platform for presenting contemporary art, but also shaping our understanding of contemporary art and how we evaluate contemporary art. As such, biennales became an active producer of contemporary art. Through its selection, it produces certain canons of art and value judgments around them. Thus, it requires a critical reassessment urgently. We were also aware of the predicament which contemporary art world has fallen into. One of its symptoms is the rigidity and stagnation of biennales as a format of contemporary art exhibition today. After the Cold War ended, biennales flourished along with global capital flows and accelerated development of cultural industry. It did help art break free from the constraints of linear art history, advocating and practicing the concept of pluralism, focusing on social issues, and applying methods of cultural studies. This development has had a positive effect on shaping global contemporary art. However, after nearly 30 years of practice, many biennales nowadays lack proactive and prioritized use of creative conceptual visions to dialogue with the reality. Instead, they have pushed this dynamic form of practice into the logic of neoliberal economy, making it, like the wider art world, increasingly hostage to the logic of capital and that of the cultural industry. As such, many biennales have been reduced to mere city propaganda, entertainment, consumption, and spectacles, lacking their own intellectual and artistic footings or historical depth. They were unable to form a complex visual narrative or to provoke deep reflections. In the process of global art constantly emphasizing the so-called plurality and diversity, the identity and cultural experience of the other have been brought into the discourse of global art. As part of the diversity, however, these categories, which used to be politically charged, have been emptied of their specific social, political, and ideological context, and have become a somewhat empty signifier without much meaning. Biennales have also given rise to certain types of curating, which can mainly be summarized as a somewhat depoliticized curatorial approach based on popular subject matters, mainly derived from or related to themes in cultural studies. As a method, cultural studies have broadened the scope of artistic visions, yet there emerged such situations where the issues addressed by our works become bigger than the works, or the engagements remain on a superficial level, or the works become interpretative tools and displays of research materials without much artistic dynamism. Political issues have been brought into biennales, but in essence, due to the lack of long-term immersion into the research and having insufficient historical understanding, this approach also tends to depoliticize the concerned issues, eliminating their original political agency. This has somehow brought issue-based exhibitions into a deadlock and has also raised questions about what kind of art and exhibitions we need today. These were considerations we had as we started curating the Triennale, as globalization has opened a new chapter in the post-pandemic era. We feel that a critical reflection on this institution and practice of biennales at such a historical juncture is needed. With the Yokohama Triennale, we do hope to contribute to broadening the definition of contemporary art. Our thinking through the COVID experience went into shaping the concept wild grass for this Triennale. We have discovered that in past few years, COVID pandemic has triggered a blockage in worldwide circulation and intensified the rigidity and problematics of the neoliberal-dominated global order. The ideological rivalries inflamed by the pandemic have revealed the fundamental limitations of the existing global system and of contemporary life. The technologies of capital and state have surpassed any possibility of rebellion. The shimmering light of all deviations since the beginning of 20th century is fading into the black hole of neoliberalism and authoritarianism. In the face of pandemics and politics, the individual has been placed in a situation of danger, irrelevance, defenselessness, with nothing to fall back on. Confronting with this series of dramatic changes, we find in Chinese modern writer Lu Xun's early work and State of Life a point of empathy with today. Lu Xun wrote a series of proses titled Wild Grass, a great literary work of symbolism between 1924 and 26. It was the most critical period in the writer's life when he encountered turbulent changes in his personal life, his emotional world, and the severe crisis of the society. In this work, he wrote about starting with despair, not hope. He fully accepted the fact that there would be no more hope or ambition, only darkness. At the same time, he devoted himself to finding an outlet in this complete darkness. In 20th century China, Lu Xun was a singularly solitary individual who constantly rebelled against existing situations. He was simultaneously a thinker who stayed attentive to the movements of the world, contemplating the fate of individuals and humanity within them. We feel the need to express today's experience through an artistic approach and hope to use this triennale to compose a wild grass of today. The mix of political hegemony, escalating ideological competition, and clashes of civilizations exerts an ongoing erosive and destructive effect on the well-being of the contemporary world. The space for individual existence has been severely compromised and overwhelmed. The fight for equality and democracy remains relevant and even more urgent today. It is therefore a principle of ethics to reaffirm the meaning of the individual in the depth of history, as opposed to the history of the successful and the powerful, and in contemporary society. Research around ordinary people and their lives can provide a stable and solid structure in the face of the complexities and challenges of constant change. Our theme, Wild Grass, Our Lives, signifies a philosophy of life that elevates the irrepressible force of individual life to respectable existence that transcends all systems, rules, regulations, and forms of control and power. Wild Grass is a model for flexible expression of subjectivity. These are three major venues where the Triennale is held, with 2 public sites. As we already have limited time today, we will talk briefly about a part of the museum and the former Daiichi Bank building. This is a floor plan of Yokohama Museum of Art, built in 1989 by Japanese architect Tengo Kenzo, a master of modernist architecture. You can see from this floor plan that the museum was designed with a consistent symmetry throughout. We made a number of references to his design by creating corresponding chapters in the exhibition, with themes and artworks that appear twice or mirroring each other throughout the exhibition. With 7 chapters in total, we weave the narrative of the exhibition in the form of a symphony and express a broad world of lives in a highly visual exhibition language. The first chapter, Our Lives, presents an integrated landscape, combining the vision of a collapsed temple and a temporary campsite. It presents scenes of emergency, fragmentation, and freedom as normality and order of life. The second chapter, Streams and Rocks, considers youth as a symbol of vitality and talks about various states of resistance and energy exchange between streams of life. The third chapter, Symbol of Depression, is like the heart of the exhibition. It is titled after a book by Japanese literary theorist Kureyagawa Hakusan, which describes in detail pangs of life and sparks of creativity that are born from them. The fourth chapter, Dialogue with the Mirror, echoes the tribute to youth in Streams and Rocks and focuses on imaginaries to construct one's subjectivity via projection onto various objects and media. The fifth chapter, My Liberation, spans 2 galleries at opposite ends of the museum. It deals with the intellectual growth of the self and the effort to find gaps in the existing system in order to liberate the self. The sixth chapter, Fires in the Woods also covers 2 galleries, presenting various radical voices of the 20th century up to the present. The final section, All the Rivers, brings together practices and imaginaries that lurk under the flow of life, connecting individuals who think independently with those who practice actively. We believe that just like the works of artists, the creation of an exhibition is a practice rooted in humanity. It comes from our contemplation of the world with attention to changes that are taking place within it. In these chapters, we revisit a selection of historical moments, events, figures, and trends of thoughts throughout the 20th century, besides presenting contemporary works. Some examples include the resonance of Japanese and Chinese left-wing woodcut movements in the early 1930s, the rise of subjective imaginary in post-war cultural construction in East Asia, the reflection on modernity after the global radical movements of the late 1960s, and the emancipatory energy of postmodernism in the 1980s. We draw inspirations from anarchy practices and thoughts that have emerged since the proposal of the end of history to explore options for possible dialogues between individuals and forms of establishment. I'm going to talk specifically about 2 components of the Triennale. The first is our lives, the opening chapter. We started this chapter with a commission project by Katajima Keizo and Moremura Yasumasa, 2 senior artists emerging from post-war Japan. It consists of 4 images appearing on 4 large billboards in Queen's Square, a busy shopping mall near Yokohama Museum of Art. In the first pair of images, Moremura-san appears as Lu Xun in his mid-age on the left and as his old self on the right. The second pair of portraits is of an average citizen photographed in his 20s and in his 50s, with 30 years a gap being between. They were taken from an ongoing project of Katajima-san. All 4 photographs were taken by Katajima. They get easily absorbed in the crowds rushing through this public space. One enters the museum passing through the barriers set up by artist Puppies, as if experiencing the routine of going through customs when entering into a foreign country. This is the sign appearing at the end of this passage. Here are some images of what is called the Grand Gallery of the museum. Here a high-ceiling atrium in the middle with looming pillars and 2 ascending successions of platforms on both sides, which we think of as 2 hillsides with the shape of a valley in between. When conceptualizing this space, Liu Xun came up with the idea of returning the huge monumental presence of the Grand Gallery to a human size. On one hand, the exhibition language was designed while following the characteristics of the architecture itself. On the other hand, we deliberately softened its monumental feature with works of artists employing organic materials and shapes such as fabric, wood, and temporary structures. In this way, we created another space within it. As our exhibition concept suggests, we want to open up a post-revolutionary world and create new social relations in everyday life without waiting for a revolution or completely abolishing or replacing the existing order in order to carry out revolutionary actions. For the exhibition language, we have taken visual references from many states of uncertainty in our daily life. For example, refugee camps, campsites for hiking and leisure, protests in public spaces. We introduce two main visual elements that give a background to these temporary states of living. Imagine large billboards standing high on both sides of the gallery and can be viewed from afar, just like on highways. On one side is a large video work by Ukraine Artist Collective Open Group, where survivors of the war imitating sounds of weapons in front of the camera. The other is a video installation by Belgian artist Emmanuel van der Awara. He downloaded 500 live streams on social media of the attempt to overthrow the US election at the Capitol by supporter of the then President Donald Trump on January 6, 2020. 30 individual PC screens were synchronized and assembled to evoke the presence of an altar. The polarizing filters on the screens have been shredded by hand using a cutter, leaving large scratch-like openings on the surfaces of the screens. The flickering lights shine like digital luminous candles in the church. On both sides, we have worked with artists to create site-specific temporary structures, including an emergency library, a temporary cafe, a laboratory for preservation of food for moments of scarcity, semi-nomadic ways of living. In short, we try to visualize a campsite through the works of these artists. As a visual prelude to the exhibition, it unveils various states of exception, which we don't always notice, but are deeply embedded in our daily reality. Refugee, exile, wandering, protests, wartime, post-disaster, happy reunions. These are social landscapes that are completely parallel to our life experiences, in which thousands of people are living. Each one of us may be subject to the same condition at any moment. Here, states of emergency and precarious existences are considered as the everyday norm, as opposed to exceptions. In a way, it is a philosophical hypothesis. Yet in the meantime, we must realize that it is nothing short of our common reality. In the atrium, we have a huge fallen tree stuck in between two columns and large fabric structures made to resemble pixel surfaces that both disguise and expose a certain presence like ghosts hovering in the space. We have contemporary sculptures of Miles Greenberg by 3D scanning his own durational performance and made into monumental and fragmented sculptures. This entire section is a mixture of a site of ruins and a temple, embodying the contradictions of daily life. This section as a whole sets the tone of the entire exhibition, confronting our crisis-ridden reality while emphasizing the resilience and agency of the individual in the face of despair. It is a landscape where multiple challenges are intertwined with a disorganized yet irrepressible force of life. Besides artists, we have invited thinkers, scholars, cultural researchers, and social activists to participate in the exhibition with the writings of their thoughts. We believe that of all the actions in an active life, thinking is the most proactive one. In the exhibition, we'll provide visitors with what we call a directory of life. On this square table in the center, the audience can read this text on site. This directory consists of selected texts by artists, thinkers, and social activists of our time. It is like the brand of the exhibition. These thinkers have been reflecting on our multifaceted era, history, and life within their own social context since 2000. Their texts outline the political, intellectual, and cultural energies hidden in our daily lives. Their voices, both near and far, are directly concerned with the awareness of existence, humanity, and human experience. They are a deep critic of the world of existence, piercing in different directions the structures of meaning and encoding of the contemporary world that we take for granted. These ideas allow us to imagine utopia in our own historical conditions, planting seeds of action and hope in the heart of their readers. Outside, we have invited Japanese street art collective Sidecore to create a large wall of graffiti directly on the wall of the museum building. This wall is continuously being erased and painted over by the artists and their graffiti friends throughout the exhibition period. Both graffiti and the actions featured in their graffiti are taboos in the urban context of Yokohama. Sidecore's work continues in the other venues. Outside the former Daiichi Bank, they present a video of portraits of their friends and common people who work at night in construction sites and other night jobs. These are people who are usually invisible during the daytime. Inside this former bank building of neoclassical style from 1929, we present a chapter entitled All the Rivers, which look at subjective agencies, imaginaries, and actions that create horizons of possibilities for individuals within confined systems. In All the Rivers, this section titled Post-Revolutionary Worlds is a selection of 8 cultural practices emerging in East Asia of the past 2 decades. They include practices in art, music, fashion, publishing, retail, and social movements. One of these practices is Japanese activist Matsumoto Hajime and the world he creates in Koenji, a district in west of Tokyo. This is us visiting Hajime in his recycle shop at Mature Riot in Koenji. Hajime was born in 1974. Since forming the association to protect the broke artists of Hosei University in 1994, where he was a student, he's been starting Menuke revolts in various places. Menuke is the Japanese word for stupid. While running a recycle shop, he and his friends also attempted to liberate public spaces through humorous methods, such as 3-person demonstration and the Koenji Revolt. In April 2011, in response to the nuclear power plant accident in Fukushima, he led the early anti-nuclear power plant movement by organizing the Stop Nuclear Power Plant demonstration. Since then, he has deepened exchanges with alternative spaces abroad, especially in Asia. Many of the practices that we have presented in this section are linked or inspired by him. From 2016, he has co-hosted No Limit Tokyo Autonomous Region, a festival of Asian underground culture network. In his own words, this is about creating a post-revolutionary world ahead of time. According to him, the idea of autonomy is to create another society ahead of the mainstream one through placemaking for work and for play, such as his own guest house and jointly operated taverns, which you see on the right. The exchange style of drinking and playing together has generated a cultural network that transcends national borders and languages, with people who experiment with different ways of life and expression from the mainstream values. They consider placemaking as a practice that encourages people to nurture a sense of self-autonomy and the possibility of social change. These spaces also play an important role as an asylum where people can flee from oppressive and conventional norms and social structures. Here, people are encouraged to develop new social relations out of dominant social spheres, such as schools, workplaces, and even homes. In this exhibition, we work with Hajime to portray his activities and thoughts through a visual archive of graphics he drew and selected objects from his practice. Inspired by the recycle shop of Hajime, Liu Ding has designed an exhibition language for this space by making use of abandoned furniture and materials from the museum and its fellow cultural institutions in Yokohama. The late American anthropologist David Graeber defined a revolutionary action as the rejecting of a particular form of power and rule by any group and rebuilding social relations even from within while standing against it. The first step to perform such an action is to break away from the society based on pre-existing forms of power. Instead of overthrowing or overtaking a power structure for the purpose of social change, as in the conventional image of a revolution, ongoing revolutionary actions can create a new set of social relations that liberate people from oppressive and hierarchical powers, enable them to live a better society built by their own hands. These examples from East Asia present such a hopeful vision to us, as we have proposed in our exhibition concept, a modest imaginary where we are all outsiders living in the cracks of the world, often covertly dismantling the systems that are killing us. This section is about some of such attempts across Asia to realize images of the post-revolutionary world in the here and now by making autonomous spaces possible and creating new social relations. The final poster bears tokens from these movements, such as bushfires, beer bottles, and speakers. So far, I have already shared a small portion of the Triennale, and we do hope that you can make it to the exhibition. And thank you for your attention. We look forward to having a discussion with you from this point on.
Thank you, Carol. It was a really in-depth look into not just the exhibition, but really how you got to that. And I found very interesting your first part of the discussion in which you were analyzing critically also the role of the biennials, the position of the biennials nowadays, because I do think that that's something that maybe we do quite a lot privately behind closed doors and so on, but there is very little public discussion about it, also from our side, from IBA, which probably should be a platform in which these things are discussed. So really thank you for the insights. I wrote down a number of questions. I had some questions already beforehand while reading the texts that presented the exhibition. I just want to remind everyone that is in the room today that they can definitely intervene and either raise their hands or write in chat or make themselves noticed as they wish. While we wait for the audience to jump in, it usually takes a little bit of breaking the ice. And so maybe I can go back to what I was mentioning about this kind of analysis of biennials that you did. And maybe turn it around and ask you from your perspective in this case, you were observing for a time, as you mentioned, the space in which this triennial was taking place from a distance without even being able to go there, and of course not being Japanese yourself. Of course, there were also these usual cultural hurdles, let's say, to figure out, and these cultural barriers that you have to navigate every time you approach a different space. And so I'm wondering, considering what you discussed about specifically the risk of depoliticizing an exhibition because of the time and because of the limits of the research that the triennial or biennial offers a curator, I want to try to turn it around and ask you, is there also not a positive element or an interesting element in approaching it from a perspective of the outsider, thus being able to approach maybe political topics that maybe you sense are raised locally, but that are not approached locally because of some taboos or whatever it is, and at the same time, you're also giving space in a country, in a cultural space, which is away from some other artists that might have political issues raising their questions in their spaces, in their countries. So, I mean, this exchange, I think, is also like I'm interested in understanding, not just theoretically, but also practically within your research for this project, how it unfolded and how these thoughts unfolded, or if you had these thoughts.
Sure. I will translate your question to Liu Ding and I'll have him respond. 他就说我们刚才提到的这个双三年展的这种问题，其实他想把这个问题转过来，就问我们说，那我们其实作为一个外面的人，怎么去面对一个新的一个文化的语境，然后在这样一个不熟悉的文化的语境里工作，从这个观念上和从这个实践上，怎么去处理这样的一个问题，是不是从一个他者的一个视角去进入一个另外一个语境来工作，也有某种好处。
那他是要回答前面双三年展的问题吗？
不是，就是说我刚才提到了双三年展的这些局限性嘛，然后他就说他想把这个问题转过来问我们说，作为这个不是日本人进到，比如说我们这个例子，作为非日本人进到另外一个语境去工作，那这种外面的人的视角是不是也有某种程度上也有一些好处？
首先就是说，我觉得我们得承认文化是有边界的，而且是所有的经验它都具有一个局限性。那我们如何克服这些局限？达到真正的沟通与交流，首先我们要认知我们的边界和局限，然后呢，我们要非常谦虚的进入他者，而进入他者并不是一个简单的文化比较的一个关系，而是用我们已有的一些经验去测量他者文化的这个质感和细节，从而来体验，就是说他者的逻辑。
Liu Ding's answer is, first of all, it's very important when we are confronted with the different cultural contexts. We need to recognize the barriers, and also we need to recognize the limitation of our own experience. With that in mind, to kind of overcome such barriers in order to have real in-depth communication and exchanges, we need to go into another cultural context with humble attitude to begin with a humble attitude. And then to enter into another context, it's not the framework of comparative it's not to go in with the comparative framework, but to go in relying on your own kind of past experiences while trying to experience, observe, and feel the details of other culture, and to try and understand the more fundamental logic of another culture.
没有。
那我加一下这个 maybe to I will also add to his answer that in our case, for example, in the Triennale, we have actually with the great help and support of the curatorial team of the Yokohama Museum of Art, during the research, we were able to meet many artists, scholars, practitioners in the Japanese art community. And that encounters and that really deep exchanges help us to first gain an impression. But at the same time, because in our own practice, we have spent about more than 10 years doing very in-depth research into our own history, into the history of contemporary in China. And we have that, we found that with that kind of knowledge, we have actually gained certain tools or certain kind of experiences that can help us fairly quickly understand the logic of another kind of cultural context. So it's not about finding similarities or expecting a kind of universal ground, but with understanding the specificity of our own cultural experiences, we are actually able to have more understanding of other specificities rooted in other histories. So we were kind of more, in a way, we were conceptually prepared for understanding another culture fairly quickly. We feel to a certain extent.
And I'm gonna just follow up from that. Instead of going to the other questions, I will go back to them hopefully later. But because you mentioned the role of the curatorial team in the museum, I would, and it's a very pragmatic question this time around. I would be interested in hearing how this dialogue unfolded and how you interacted, not just in the first phases in which you were forced to because you couldn't travel, but also afterwards in terms of what you just described in terms of navigating these I don't know, interests that you had and local interests and so on. Like, how do you mediate all of these elements, let's say, together? Because you're obviously interacting with an institution that is there on a more constant basis.
你要回答吗？还是我回答？就是他说我们怎么跟，因为我刚才讲了这个，我们进入另外一个文化语境，然后他就说，他说想更具体的了解，在这个过程当中，我们怎么跟他们这个团队在工作。
你回答。
我回答。I check with Liu Ding and I think I can take this question on my own because we have actually talked a lot about this while reflecting on the process of working on the Triennale. What has been incredible is that many colleagues who have seen the exhibition tell us that they could tell how closely the kind of synergy between us, our curatorial vision, and the team, the curatorial team from the museum that have supported us to realize the vision. The kind of mutual trust has really come through the realization of the exhibition. And the way that we have worked with the team is that from the very beginning, when we were not able to travel, we had very regular meetings online, where most of the discussions were very much about our curatorial ideas and also our understanding of artistic practices. There was discussion about administrative matters, but it was always kept quite at a minimal level, where most of the exchanges were about our concept, what we were interested in. The team has made a great effort to understand where we have come from and how we want to approach the exhibition. And it was the first time that we worked together, but when the borders were open, the museum director, Mika Kuraya, and Aki have made an effort to come to China to spend a few days with us, seeing where we work, meet with people, meet with colleagues in our context. With that trip, they really also gained a lot of insights into our context and why we wanted to talk about these issues in our exhibition and how we approach the exhibition. So that level of interaction has been very critical in the realization of our thoughts.
I'm just asking quickly to Aki if she wants also to intervene in this. Otherwise, there is a question in the chat. Okay.
I think I could just add to that all the time, we only started working with foreign curators in our institution since 2020. And there's two barriers. One is language, because our office is not all bilingual, or we are not educated in English language. But a lot of AI translation and also just a lot of body language really helps us to communicate. And it's spending time together really is the way we learn about each other rather than that language. But there is initially a language barrier. The other is institutional barrier, where we're quite a museum open to the public. And there are certain missions that we have as a public institution funded by the municipality. But at the same time, we also, Yokohama Triennale is a great opportunity to question that barrier and to see what the limit is for our public institution to really engage in what society is about. Oftentimes we do impressionist exhibitions to bring audiences, and of course we do that as an institution too, but the Triennale is an opportunity for us to really venture out of our usual museum setting. And we're quite conservative as an institution, so Triennale really is the way we break our mold. And so, yeah, it takes time for our mutual, interest to intertwine and also to build trust. But I think on both sides, we make that effort. And I think this time, as Carol says, and they say in their curatorial statement, that it's an individual internationalism. It's not about Japan and China being friendly, but it's about myself and Ludine and Carol, our own individual specific persons, building this trust that really enables us to work together, despite the many, many differences in political and economical, environment that we have to live in. Yeah.
Thank you for the additional insights there, Aki. I'm going to read the question that was sent over the chat by Jungsi Lu. I have a follow-up question. Do you have any concrete examples that demonstrate how you navigate the cultural context regarding the exhibition contents? especially the artist selection, and they say that they are all from different cultural backgrounds, the artists that you're presenting.
有一个问题就是关于我们有没有一个比较明确的例子，可以说明我们怎么在选择艺术家的时候，怎么去超越这些文化的这个背景、文化的这个差异。
主要就是人跟人的连接，这是最重要的。
具体的
首先
例子，
是从人的角度，那具体的例子就跟这个松本在的连接，就是去到他那里，听他讲的那个，看他的所有的东西，然后交流我们的想法，看能不能尝试，达成做一件事情，这是非常简单的一个。
What Liu Ding was saying is that the most important kind of approach is to, like what we have been saying over again, is to create interpersonal connection. So one of the there are many examples, but one of the example is that with Matsumoto Hajime, we did not know him before. We only read about his practice. So when we started our research in Japan, he was one of the persons that we listed that we wanted to meet. So the Yokohama Triennale team first paid a visit to his shop, just went directly to his shop and asked if he's willing to meet with us. And then we went and we met, we sat down, we shared, we talked about why we wanted to see him, we learned about his practice. And somehow we find a way to bring his practice into the exhibition. So, and that goes with many of the artists in this exhibition. Liu Ding mentioned again that trust is a very important trust between practitioners and people who are serious and dedicated about what they do, share this trust quite easily. And we have experienced this again and again in many of the artists that we approach for this exhibition, because many of them we have not met before. We already reached out with this invitation, and so it has worked again and again.
包括我们见面那些遗产没有这个艺术家的他们的家庭，也是信任，严肃的这个分享。
Liu Ding said that there are also a few cases where the artists we wanted to invite, for example, the Japanese artist Tomiyama Teko, who we actually presented quite substantively in our exhibition. She had already passed away. We approached the family who had very little contact with the art world, but we went with a very sincere and serious kind of mission, and we explained our thoughts quite in detail. And that kind of, it was the first meeting, but it opened up a whole world to us. So there are many, many examples like this in this exhibition.
Thank you for the quite nice explanation, and I think reiterating this human element and this interpersonal element is, I think, what I think a lot of the things that you're building on points to, and it's great to hear. I'm gonna go straight to another question that came over the chats, this time from Sevi Zampalla. I can ask her if she wants to pose it herself, or I can read it. I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. Hello, thank you for the presentation. I'm curious about the outdoor works. Would you like to talk a little bit about how you worked on this? For instance, how you chose the location, and how you see those interventions in relation to the chapters and in part of the exhibition across museum spaces. Thank you, Savi, for posing the question.
其实这个公共空间的项目是非常难做的。首先也是要依仗横滨美术馆跟横滨市政府的沟通，然后争取到这个公共空间，包括得到市政府的支持，这是一个非常大的工程。就是这个是使用了大量在技术性上使用了大量的这个人力的成本。
继续。
然后呢，户外公共空间的使用呢，包括是美术馆外墙供应的使用，当然在日本，包括是这个商场的这个使用，都是有很严格的这个规定的。那这些在遵循这些规定的情况下呢，其实，我们最初想到用这些户外空间，还是来自于就是说我们所需要表达的内容，比如这个那个生村的和这个北岛的合作，我们就想让在这个非常繁忙的商业空间里出现4个巨大的普通人的形象。而这些普通的人，他其实就是你我中间的一个。这对展览的信息传达是非常重要的。
To work with public space is very challenging in any context. So in Yokohama, for example, we really very fortunate to have the full support of not only the team from the museum, but also the municipal government. Because to use the large billboards in the shopping mall, for example, that really requires so many resources in terms of technical support. And but our consideration for working with these public spaces came mostly from the content and our concept of the Triennale, what we wanted to express. We needed, for example, to place these 4 large portraits of 4 normal people in one of the busiest shopping malls in Yokohama. We feel that this kind of portraits of everyday person is exactly portraits of you and us, like every one of us. So conceptually is a very important statement for our theme to have the 4 portraits there. And then fortunately, we could do it with that support.
Thank you. And it was one of the things that I wanted to ask, but I think we're running a bit low on time. So I will ask another quick questions, but what you just discussed now with this stressing the importance of reframing ordinary life and so on, I do think that it's extremely important in a moment in which this whole element of quote unquote populism, as it is framed in political language, is really being hijacked by right-wing politics throughout the world. And I think we're often forgetting, I think we forgot how to frame ordinary life and normal daily routines and lives and so on as important political acts in itself. This was just a statement that I just wanted to, it was just a thought that came while listening through your presentation and through these questions, through your answers. What I did want to ask you as a final question, though, was more specifically about a curatorial approach in terms of how you went about imagining the life of the exhibition. So specifically for the director of life, but also for all the rivers space that you described, or the space where all the rivers was inhabited by all the rivers. These feel like very dynamic elements, or director of life, this idea of this reading list, let's say, and so on. I wanted to understand whether this is a static and fixed set of references, let's say, or if it's something dynamic that, I don't know, maybe even visitors can contribute to, or specific theoretician or artist can contribute to throughout the exhibition, let's say. So whether it's like you set this list at the beginning of the show and then it stays like that for the rest of the show, or if it's something alive, let's say. And similar with the space that you showed, that seems like a very social space, like a very active space, I would like to understand how it is activated throughout the exhibition, if it is activated on a daily basis, or if it's more of a static display of some practices.
Directory of Life is a set selection of 10 texts, so that won't grow, that won't change. The interaction that the audience will have is to read the text on site. In the All the Rivers section, in particular, the section of post-revolutionary worlds, where we presented various practices. Throughout the exhibition, there are actually talks, events that happening in the space. Performances, for example, that are happening in the upcoming weekend, so that it's continuously activated by the practitioners that we feature in this section. But it was a very important idea for us to not just have these events happening, but create kind of a document of each practice. That was a very important kind of beginning point, that to create a document of these very lively practices that are continuously happening, providing a clear kind of outline of their thinking and their actions, can help the audience understand them clearly. So we began by wanting to create a very precise and clear and lively document of their actions and their histories. And then we invite the actions in the exhibition space.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Lu Ding, and
thank you all for listening.
And I also want to thank our colleague Jennifer, who is managing this event from the backgrounds.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
So with this, I think I can, again, thank also the audience and remind everyone to keep track of our next events through our social media channels and through our website, of course. Thank you very much for being with us today.